The peaceful college town of Moscow, Idaho, was forever changed on the morning of November 13, 2022. In the early hours of that cold fall day, a tragedy occurred that sent shockwaves through not only the community but the entire country. 4 University of Idaho students were found dead in the house they had rented off campus, a house that was supposed to be a sanctuary for these young, vibrant lives. This is the story of what happened to Madison Mogen, Kaylee Goncalves, Xana Kernodle and Ethan Chapin, a story that still leaves many questions unanswered. The victims were Madison, Kaylee, Xana, and Ethan, 3 young women and 1 young man, all full of dreams and hopes for the future. Their home on King Road was a typical student rental, a hub of life and laughter, filled with friends and memories. The 4 friends had spent the evening like many college students, enjoying a Saturday night out. Madison and Kaylee had been to a popular local bar, while Xana and Ethan attended a fraternity party. Everything seemed normal as they returned home, likely expecting nothing more than a restful night's sleep after a day of fun. But what awaited them was something out of a nightmare. The next morning, 2 other roommates, who were asleep in their respective rooms at the time of the incident, awoke to find a scene they would never forget. The details of what they saw are distressing, a glimpse into the aftermath of a tragic event that shook the town of Moscow to its core. The initial 911 call was placed at around noon, and it was made by one of the surviving roommates, as well as other friends who had arrived at the house. Authorities responded quickly, and what they found was shocking: 4 lives taken in an act of violence, with no apparent motive. The investigation began immediately, but for weeks, there were more questions than answers. The Moscow Police Department, along with state police and the FBI, faced intense scrutiny as they tried to piece together the timeline and find any clue that might lead them to the perpetrator. The lack of a clear suspect led to fear and anxiety throughout Moscow, with many students choosing to leave campus or return home out of fear for their safety. People began to wonder, was the perpetrator someone they knew? Was it a random act? And, most importantly, could it happen again? The King Road house, once a bustling center of student life, became a crime scene. Investigators combed through the house for evidence, collecting over 100 pieces and conducting numerous interviews. They reviewed surveillance footage from nearby homes and businesses, searching for anything that could provide a break in the case. The community, meanwhile, held vigils to remember the victims, lighting candles and sharing stories of their friends who were taken too soon. The overwhelming feeling of grief was mixed with frustration as weeks passed without an arrest. It wasn't until late December that authorities finally announced a major development. A suspect had been identified: Bryan Kohberger, a 28-year-old criminology PhD student from nearby Washington State University. The arrest of Kohberger was a shock to many. He was studying criminal justice, and on the surface, seemed like an unlikely suspect. However, as details emerged, it became apparent that the suspect had been watching the victims for some time. Phone records and surveillance footage linked him to the case, and a white Hyundai Elantra seen near the scene became a critical piece of evidence in leading investigators to Kohberger. The arrest provided some answers, but it also raised even more questions. Why did Kohberger target these students? What was his motive? Investigators believe that Kohberger had an academic interest in crime that might have taken a dark turn. Reports indicated that he had applied for an internship with the local police department and had even posted online, asking for volunteers to participate in a study on the psychological traits of criminals. It seemed as though his fascination with crime had somehow crossed the line into something unspeakable. The media coverage of the case was intense, and the small town of Moscow found itself at the center of a national spotlight. Journalists camped out for weeks, covering every detail of the investigation and the subsequent court proceedings. The public followed closely, speculating on what might have driven Kohberger to commit such an act. His first court appearance was brief but significant. He was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. He has since pleaded not guilty, and as of now, his trial is set to begin soon, with prosecutors pushing for the maximum sentence. Further investigation revealed that Kohberger had visited the area around the King Road house multiple times in the weeks leading up to the incident. Cell phone records showed that his device had pinged near the victim's home on at least 12 occasions, often late at night or in the early morning hours. This raised further questions about his intentions and whether he had been stalking the victims, planning the crime well in advance. It painted a picture of a calculated individual who meticulously observed his targets, waiting for the right moment to act. One particularly eerie aspect of the investigation was the discovery of online activity that seemed to hint at Kohberger's dark thoughts. Investigators found anonymous posts on forums and social media platforms that discussed violent fantasies and detailed knowledge of crime scene procedures. While it hasn't been definitively proven that Kohberger was behind these posts, the language used and the knowledge displayed were consistent with someone with his background. These digital breadcrumbs added another layer of mystery and unease to an already disturbing case. The surviving roommates, who had been in the house at the time of the incident, also became a focal point of public interest. Initially, there was confusion and even suspicion directed toward them. How could they have slept through such a horrific event? Why did they wait until midday to call 911? However, as more details emerged, it became clear that they were also victims in their own way, traumatized by the experience and struggling to make sense of what had happened. One of the roommates reportedly saw a masked figure in the house that night but, in a state of shock and fear, locked herself in her room, believing it might have been a partygoer or someone who posed no immediate threat. This glimpse of the suspect, though terrifying, ultimately provided crucial information that helped shape the investigation. The psychological profile of Bryan Kohberger became another area of intense scrutiny. Experts have weighed in, suggesting that Kohberger exhibited traits consistent with narcissistic tendencies. His background in criminology and criminal justice may have given him a sense of superiority, an illusion that he could outsmart law enforcement and commit the perfect crime. Friends and acquaintances from his past described him as socially awkward, with some recalling instances where he displayed troubling behavior or an obsession with gruesome topics. Yet, no one could have imagined that this fascination would manifest in such a horrific way. In the months following Kohberger's arrest, more information about his actions before and after the incident came to light. Surveillance footage captured his vehicle traveling back to Pullman, Washington, shortly after the estimated time of the crime. Authorities believe that he returned to his apartment and began cleaning his car, likely attempting to eliminate any evidence that could tie him to the crime. Despite these efforts, forensic experts managed to uncover traces of DNA that linked him to the crime scene, evidence that would become a cornerstone of the prosecution's case. One of the most heartbreaking elements of this case has been the impact on the victims' families. The parents and siblings of Madison, Kaylee, Xana, and Ethan have been vocal in their grief, sharing stories of their loved ones and calling for justice. Kaylee's father, in particular, became a prominent figure in the media, expressing his frustration with the pace of the investigation but also his gratitude once an arrest was made. The families have found solace in the community's support, but the void left by their loss is immeasurable. They have made it clear that they will not rest until they see justice served for their children. As the trial approaches, the legal teams are preparing for what promises to be a complex and emotionally charged case. The prosecution is relying heavily on the forensic evidence, the DNA found on the knife sheath, the cell phone records, and the surveillance footage. They have also gathered witness testimonies, including those from the surviving roommates and neighbors who reported unusual activity around the house. The defense, on the other hand, is expected to challenge the integrity of the evidence, questioning the procedures used to collect and analyze it. They may also attempt to cast doubt on the reliability of the witness statements, arguing that the chaotic nature of the night led to confusion and misidentification. The small town of Moscow has been forever changed by these events. The sense of safety that once defined the community has been shattered, replaced by a lingering fear and mistrust. The University of Idaho has increased security measures, installing more surveillance cameras and providing additional support services to students. Despite these efforts, the shadow of what happened on King Road looms large, a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the unpredictability of evil. In an effort to help the community heal, the university has organized memorials and created scholarships in the names of the victims. These initiatives aim to honor the lives of Madison, Kaylee, Xana, and Ethan by supporting future students and ensuring that their legacy lives on. The house on King Road, once a place of joy and friendship, will soon be demolished, and in its place, a garden or memorial may be established, something that will allow the community to remember without being haunted by the past. The story of the Idaho student murders is a chilling reminder that evil can hide in plain sight. Bryan Kohberger was not a shadowy figure lurking in the dark. He was a student, a neighbor, someone who walked among the very people he would later terrorize. The community of Moscow has shown incredible resilience, but the scars left by this tragedy will take a long time to heal. As we await the outcome of the trial, we are left with the hope that justice will be served and that the families of Madison, Kaylee, Xana, and Ethan will find some measure of peace. Thank you for watching. If you found this story compelling, please like and subscribe for more in-depth explorations of the true crime cases that shock and shape our world. And as always, stay safe.